In this week's conversation, Ben Fennell shares his journey from aspiring rugby player to CEO of the Growth House, reflecting on his experiences at BBH and the lessons learned in leadership, team dynamics, and client relationships. He discusses the importance of cultural understanding in advertising, the challenges of starting a new business, and the insights gained from writing a book on high performance teams called World Class, which we will discuss at length. The conversation emphasizes the significance of communication, collaboration, and building strong relationships in both business and personal growth. I hope you enjoy. Hi, Ben. Welcome to the podcast.
Very good to be with you, Steve.
Thank you. Exciting, this one. A man from my world and a leader in that world. So you've got two, as you've said, two parts to your career, or two big chunky parts with lots of stories in between. So I'm looking forward to this as a personal journey to find out how to get it right and how to get to your level. So as I mentioned, we traditionally have a bit of a kickoff, which is to give our listeners an understanding of why you're sitting here as CEO of the Growth House at the moment. So if you could give us a bit of a background from when you kicked off your career to how you got here, that'd be really helpful.
So I wanted to be a professional rugby player and went through the heartbreak of figuring out that I wasn't anywhere near good enough, and got onto the grad scheme at BBH. So BBH took 3 grads, and that was 1994. So BBH at that stage was, doing amazing work on Levi's and Haagen-Dazs and Boddingtons and all that good stuff. And had an amazing 7-8 years there. And I figured out, I think quite early actually, and this will be relevant for what I do now, because I'd done quite a lot of sport at a reasonable level. I remember within the first month or so getting some feedback, and it was great feedback. It was helpful. It was stuff I could use. And looking left and right at my 2 fellow grad trainees who were absolutely on the floor. They were knocked
They were
sideways.
broken by it. Yeah.
They were. And I remember thinking at the time, my goodness, I've got a massive head start here. I've presumed that everyone just does feedback, loves feedback, wants feedback, and that just isn't the case. So anyway, had a wonderful 7-8 years at BBH, ended up running quite a lot of Unilever and Diageo and some of BBH's biggest clients. Got my first big leadership job to go and run BBH's business in Asia. So I ran BBH Asia Pac from 02 to 06, which was incredible. I was only 30 and they'd kind of taken a punt.
Wow. Where were you based? Whereabouts in Asia were you?
Based in Singapore, but we had a Tokyo office. We had clients all over the region, and I helped set up China and do the preliminaries for setting up in India. So it was a
pretty decent geographical split, that, isn't it?
Yeah. So you were flying all around the region, learning about incredibly different business cultures in magnificent kind of Asian cities. So that was brilliant. And then came back to run the kind of the mothership. BBH London was still 50% of revenue and profit for the group. And so I ran BBH London from 06 for 12 years all the way through to 2018. So 12 years in the end. A couple of years longer than I probably should have actually, which is something we can talk about. And then set up the Growth House at the end of 18. Really because I think what I'd figured out, when you're CEO for that long, you get to work with and for unbelievable CEOs, the Dave Lewis's at Tesco and the, Carolyn McCall's at ITV and Alan Jopes at Unilever. And what I observed with those leaders is they would want to talk about the advertising for 20 minutes, of course, but then the rest of the meeting or the meal would be about growth. And it would be about the growth of their people. It would be about the growth of their business. And they would invariably be very growth mindset themselves. They would be constantly trying to make themselves better. So it seemed to me there was an opportunity in this space of growth for the individual, growth for the team, growth for the business. And I did a bit of work on personal purpose, and I think I figured out that's what my personal purpose was: grow leaders, grow teams, grow businesses. And at that point, I decided, well, I need to set up a business that does that.
As you do.
As you do, yeah. I mean, that's a 6 months worth of staring at the ceiling got me to help figure that out. But that's where we got to in the
I was
end.
going to say, when you left BBH, did you know what you were going to do, or was it just like, I need a change, I need to move on?
So, because I'd given them a long runway, I'd given them a sort of almost a year warning of getting a new team embedded and helping my successor get stuck in. I had quite a gentle runway into my exit, and
Yeah,
that allowed me to think about, did I want to do, another big CEO job? I looked at some big jobs in sport. None of them quite worked out. I looked at a couple of private equity things, and then ended up going, the thing I'm most passionate about is this idea of growing leaders and teams and businesses. And so, to curate exactly the job spec I want, I think I've got to set it up myself.
yeah. That's one way of sorting it out, isn't it? To make sure, oh,
Yeah.
I'm perfect for that role. I think I'll hire myself.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh, that's brilliant. And I suppose you also had a lot of contacts that you could go and say, I'm thinking of setting this up. Can I run it past you? And then obviously potentially clients too.
Yeah, I think any entrepreneur or anyone starting a new business will know that you hit up your former contacts and your own black book first. And
Yeah.
fortunately, two or three fabulous people gave me a break. I always think your first two or three case studies are so important, because without them, it's so difficult to get more business. And they've taken the biggest risk because you don't have case studies at that stage. And they knew me as an advertising partner. They didn't know me as a trainer or a coach or anyone with any real credibility in the space I was trying to go into. So I think you always remember your kind of founding clients. And for that reason, Jeff Dodds at Virgin Media will be someone who I'll kind of always remember, because, like I said, those first jobs are the hardest to get.
Yeah, it's good though, isn't it? It's good that you acknowledge that, because a lot of people think, oh no, it's just luck. It's like, it's not. People help you up, and like you say, we've both been around long enough in these industries to realise, careful on the way up, because it's very careful on the way back down if not.
100%. Yeah, no, there's that great gag. What was his name? Who was the first? What was the name of the first comic who was very blue? Bob Monkhouse.
Oh
Bob
yeah.
Monkhouse did the gig at Blackburn or something like that, and he said, "You only come here on your way up or on your way down. Lovely to see you all again."
Yeah. Dudum.
Yeah, there you go.
Genius. You see, it's what there's truth in humour always. So go back to that. So you'd obviously been at what, BBH for about 6 years as a graduate, and then you're thrown into Asia, or even less, was it? How obviously everybody talks about imposter syndrome and stuff like that nowadays, but how did you feel? Did you think, I can do this, or do you think, I've got nothing to lose? What was going through your mind as you were thrust out there?
Yeah, so it was slightly longer than that. So it was 94 to '02. So it was kind of 8 years. Um, so I always think I didn't know Asia at all, but I knew BBH really well.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
I was running more revenue and arguably bigger relationships in London than the size of Singapore, which is why it was such a brilliant first leadership job. But I was parachuted into a very experienced leadership team. So I had
Okay.
a very smart head of planning who was a kind of who was an Asia vet who'd been in Asia for 10 years, a brilliant creative director. And my secret weapon was this brilliant Chinese Singaporean managing director called um, Christine Ung, who would tell me on a regular basis, how I'd misread a meeting or what I'd done wrong. Or, I'd walk out of Cred's meetings thinking, well, we nailed that and should
Yeah.
be,
Job sorted.
we will never see them again. Uh, and vice versa. It just was a brilliant font of, wisdom, experience, coaching. So I was able to give the business some go forward and some energy and some new ways of doing things, but I had a brilliantly experienced management team around me
I think that's
who
that
all
key, isn't it?
who all, by the way, hated me for the first 12 months because I was 10 years younger than all of them and knew nothing
Who's
about it.
this upstart come from London, thinks he knows everything? Yeah, yeah.
Completely. Yeah. And I made, I absolutely took me 12 months to get my leadership team on side, but then the next 3 years were fantastic.
I think it's a great lesson to anybody listening, isn't it? That you can never do anything on your own. You're always part of a fantastic team, and the quicker you understand that and respect that, like you say, especially when you've got cultural differences and language, never mind, and customs that you could have really cocked that up, couldn't you? You could be like, back on the phone to London. Yeah, we've landed that, and like, oh, they're not returning my calls.
No, and I also think there's BBH has operated in 7, 8 different parts of the world, and the secret sauce or the cocktail you're always trying to create is people who know the region really well and people who know the BBH brand really well. And if you're over indexed on either one of those two, you're not going to succeed. Or if you're under indexed on either. So getting that blend of, like I said, someone who knows what, BBH's standards are, what good process, what, managing a great pitch relationship, creative process looks like, coupled with real, on the ground expertise, I think was what we kind of created.
Was there much cultural difference between the two offices?
Yeah, I mean, goodness, there was cultural difference between every market. I mean, I'll give you a tiny example. We looked after Lynx Axe, and we had Axe in India, in the Philippines, in Thailand, and there was one more which I can't remember. But just think about those three markets. You've got one of the biggest Catholic countries in the world. You've got a Buddhist country. You've got a massive Hindi country. You know, the approach to um, the approach to seduction, courting women. We had Johnny Walker across about 10 different Asian markets. So the approach to status and progress. So you were in a different Asian city almost every week, and it was kind of a crash course in business culture, in keeping your eyes and ears open for consumer learning. So
Yeah.
it was the most. I would say it was. I was so privileged. It was such an amazing first 4 years of leadership, where it was kind of all different, but within a framework that I knew really well.
Was there a thread of the BBH that you recognised from London in those businesses, like you say, although translated for each market?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, the BBH philosophy, as you know, the whole thinking of what the black sheep stands for is doing things differently, is the
Hmm.
concept of difference. So if the whiskey category is all doing work a certain way, we're going to try and do it differently. So
Yeah.
you have to find clients that share that mindset, which is not always the case, and you have to find talent that really believes in that as well. So what I really think my role was, because they were all brilliant practitioners, but I just think you know they lacked a little bit of ambition for what the business could be.
Hmm.
So they were jogging along at a certain amount of growth, and I think what they would say, and we ended up doubling the business in 4 years and had a really good run as kind of regional agency of the year. I think I hope I gave them a bit more ambition and a bit more confidence of the type of clients we could win.
Yeah. The interesting point you just said there actually was, like you say, I understand this world we're in, and maybe other listeners know, but like BBH has always been known for that. But I wonder if you, as you became more famous, let's call it the brand, and you picked up bigger clients, you probably attracted clients that wouldn't have necessarily been in your sweet spot in that challenger want to do something different. So that was probably quite an interesting first meeting, wasn't it? It's like, well, no, you're market leader. You're not going to be safe anymore. We're gonna make you challenged. Is that a problem you had to overcome many times?
Yeah, and the reason the black sheep poster, which was originally done for Levi's back in 1982, is the first chart of the creds in every BBH deck, and it sits in reception in every BBH office. Is you have to flush that out, because
Yeah,
if that's not the kind of work that client wants to do, we're just not going to be right for each other.
yeah.
And I
You're
think,
gonna you're just gonna clash, aren't you? And not realize why.
well, and it's why you should always be really, really clear about who you are and what you stand for, because trying to cover that up in a pitch process and play it safe, even if you do win it, it's going to end up going wrong pretty fast. So
Hmm.
we always found it was a really good sort of bellwether in a creds or a chemistry meeting to talk about that, because if half the meeting said that doesn't resonate with me at all, then no probs, go find a partner, because we're not going to be right for each other. We're always going to challenge you, and either that's something you really want, or that's going to be a persistent stone in your shoe.
You're gonna get really annoyed.
Yeah,
Funny, isn't it? It's great. I love it. So, in terms of that Asia time, must have been one of the best apprenticeships to come back, as you said, to HQ in London
yeah,
and get the big job because of the different cultures, peoples, clients, languages that you dealt with. You probably thought, "There's nothing these guys can throw at me now."
yeah. Well, I it didn't feel like that actually, because what happened while I was away is BBH London went on the most unbelievable tear, and they won campaign agency 3 years of the year, 3 years on the trot. They won the British Airways Global and Unilever pitch. So actually, what I got back to was a really exhausted
Yeah,
business that had grown a lot, but was really struggling to sort of onboard that business and sort of swallow the amount of relationships, clients. So,
yeah. Sort of
what,
catch up to its wins, nearly. Yeah,
yeah, you know what it's like. Growth is great, but once you've won that stuff, you've then got to turn it into great work. You've got to embed and onboard all those relationships. So, actually, '06, '07, '08 were quite tough the first few years. And again, I was back into a new leadership team again. Um, so I definitely found those first few years quite challenging.
hmm,
Um, and then really, it was BH London was kind of 400 people, and it was, way bigger business, with far more people. And it takes a little while to get your arms around it. So two little things I did on my return that, in retrospect, I'm kind of proud of. So the first is I did a lot of flying in Asia, and with about 3 months to go before coming back, I got my newly appointed PA in London to get me a photo and a name for every one of the 400 people in BBH London. And every flight I was on, I just studied these names and faces. And so I arrived on day one, and unless you'd massively changed your hairdo
yeah,
or
with a big beard, or
put
something.
on or lost a load of weight, I knew who everyone was. And you only have to do a few of those in the lift or in the morning for word to get round that you've done your research. So that was one good thing, I think. And then the other thing that I'm sort of proud of is I didn't do an internal meeting for the first month. I just went
Okay.
and listened to clients. So I came back in the March of '06, and I just got my PA to get me 3 client meetings a day. And I just relentlessly, I went with a book and a pen and no charts, and no cell, and I just
You just
listened
listen.
to senior
Mm,
clients. And why was that good? Because a couple of things happened. Firstly, it meant that a month back, I knew more about what BBH's clients thought of BBH than anyone else in the business. Secondly, it made a real statement to the clients and to the agency that I really cared about what clients thought
Yeah.
about and
Yeah.
where I should be putting my
But your
energy.
first point of contact was
Yeah,
clients, not your team. Yeah, yeah, it's
yeah,
lovely. Yeah.
and listening, not talking. Um, and then the final thing is it set up a thing that I did for the next 12 years, which is at the start of every year, I'd go and just listen to my clients. And that became a kind of an annual ritual. And I can't tell you the amount of times that we could head off a problem because we'd got ahead of it or heard it earlier than we might in one of those listening sessions. It was a invaluable way of starting the year.
Or probably spot opportunity too,
Yeah.
in the same way.
Yeah, exactly right.
It's amazing, isn't it, if you get people to talk what they'll share and you can go, we've solved that for somebody else over here. How about? And suddenly they're inviting you in rather than you pitching.
Well, and I think that connects to good versus kind of bad agency innovation or diversification. I watched BBH often launch products and innovate to areas that the BBH leadership team were really interested in, but that our clients weren't necessarily. And that
Yeah.
often kind of failed. Whereas the thing I always tried to do is really understand where else the clients might want us to go, or critically, where would we be credible? Because there were some things they just didn't think we'd be able to do. But, agile production, pharma, sports marketing, user experience, these were all things the client was really happy to give to a black sheep business if we built and showed capability.
Yeah. It's amazing, isn't it? It's like you say, but you're always sticking to your core of what you were. And I think that's so you don't become schizophrenic and then you've got that level of personalization. Suddenly that's quite a powerful blend, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think again, I don't know enough about your business model, but 7 years ago, any communications agency needed to have multiple specialisms,
Yeah.
and you can try and build those yourself, but that's quite hard. Often an acquisition, bringing in some really capable senior people is a better way to do it if they buy your core values, beliefs,
Yeah.
etc. So that my last 5 years, really 4 years at BBH, was spent doing that, which is we built, an agile studio, a health business, a pharma business, uh, a sort of a digital user experience business, and all of those ended up, being run by very senior kind of founders. And a lot of my job was just making sure that they were not just happy, but they were building black sheep businesses. They
Yeah.
were connecting their subject matter expertise with the belief system of the company they were now part of.
Yeah. That you all shared that culture. I'm smiling because that's the journey we're on. And it's exactly it, isn't it? You trying to organically build stuff is just so hard and it's too slow for the way the market is. Certainly now, never mind 7 years ago, as there was a lot of change coming through.
Yeah, and I would argue when we got it wrong, we went for less senior, less
Yeah.
experienced, who were a bit easier to manage. And
Yeah.
where we got it right, they were founders, they were leaders, they were harder to manage and harder to kind of to keep it all coherent. But my goodness, it was worth it.
Yeah. Because the upside you got, and well, obviously when you put that sort of talent in front of your clients, they were like,
That's
well done, Ben. He's a good lad. Oh, she's a great lady. Let's go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, and cross sell is clearly what the kind of business model is. What you've got a foot in the door with the advertising, but you want what used to be called below the line, or you want the PR spend or whatever. All you can really do is get them in front of clients. Then it's over to them.
Yeah.
And if those people are not heavyweight enough, no
Not going
clients
to
go.
work, is it? They're going
No.
to get sniffed. Not going to pass the sniff test, are they at all? Right. So we've done part one of your career, and obviously that was a big chunk of your life, and I'm sure we'll
Yeah.
come back to it. Before we move on to the Growth House, you became an author at the same, didn't you? Sort of those early days with Mr. Will Greenwood. I don't know, what was that, 21, 20, 20?
Yeah. So what? Again, this is with sort of perfect hindsight, but one of the things that's quite hard to figure out if you've worked for one company for 24 years is how many of your beliefs and how much of your IP is BBH IP
Yeah,
and how much is kind of your own or is an evolved set of, the best of BBH with some other kind of inputs. And the beauty of doing what we did and what we did with the book is we interviewed about 120 amazing individuals who were either business leaders or athletes or coaches. And my contact list in business was pretty good, and obviously Will's contact list in sport is really amazing. And so first of all, it was just a privilege interviewing, the Alan Jopes and the Michael Johnsons and the Dan Carters. It was just a brilliant exercise.
it's incredible. We better point out, obviously, it's Will Greenwood. Obviously, for those who don't know, the
Yeah,
2003 Rugby World Cup winner, played for England for about 10 years. So yeah, just in case, because I obviously know because we're from the same sport. But
fair play. And yeah, and the book's called World Class. And what we did is we interviewed all these people, and a thesis started emerging that all of the most elite cultures, from the All Blacks to Pixar to NASA, whatever, it seemed to us were doing three things. They were absolutely packing their teams with difference. So, difference of every form, of course, of gender and ethnicity, but in particular, kind of cognitive difference. So,
yeah,
phase one of building elite cultures, it seemed to us, was, embrace and celebrate difference. Then they do a ton of work to forge togetherness, because if you've got all that difference, you're going to need some glue that holds the team together, be that values, code of conduct, purpose, behavioral framework, whatever. And then they really focus on growth. They focus on the sort of the growth of the individual and the team and the business. And so we sort of created this little, Greens is really mathsy. And so we created this sort of equation of, you know, difference times togetherness times growth, equals team success. And so we broke the book down into those three parts. The first third about all the different ways you can celebrate difference, the middle about forging togetherness, and the last about accelerating growth, and tried to pepper it with lots of the quotes and the ideas from our interviews, but then also to try and make it really tangible with kind of tools and ideas that you might be able to use.
I think it is. I've read the book, and it's that the practical nature. Obviously, I've got a bias because I love sport and I love business because but sport first. And I think the way that you manage to make it practical, because you could read about the All Blacks and think, well, yeah, they're elite sportsmen. That's all they're doing all day. They've got nothing else. They're national heroes in the country. Of course, they're going to be good. But I think it's the way that you translate those lessons that lay under the importance of the shirt and the passing it on, but that pride in what you do. It's a good read from that point of view. So we'll put a link on. We'll put a link on the podcast.
That's very kind of you, and that means a lot, because in the work we do now, and we use a lot of speakers, and those interviews were a great way of meeting and connecting with speakers for the Growth House. But one of the things I always say to a speaker is, being inspirational is kind of half of the job. I don't want to diminish how important inspiration is and how hard it is to be really inspirational, but the difference between the really great speakers and everyone else is, as well as being inspirational, they give ideas and tools that have real utility and that have application. So I'm always pushing in an interview or when we play in a speaker for, what is it that this audience can take? What can they
Yeah,
use? Because inspiration isn't enough.
yeah. I think that's right because if people, you've obviously come from the advertising world, and there was a chap we worked with years ago, and I can't remember. He was one of the big agencies in the 80s, going back that far. And we were doing some TV for Krabby's alcoholic ginger beer at the time. And his kind of thing, he said, what you must keep forefront of mind is that if you're asking a customer, a future consumer, to invest time and spend time on your brand, you've got to reward them from it. And they've got, whether it's laugh, cry, be educated, it's a really great thing to always like, if I'm going to ask you to read my book, what do I get out of it? Because great, yeah. Bloody hell, Ben and Will have met all these famous people. Well done them. But actually, if you suddenly go, so here's how you can practically translate it through, I think it's a fabulous, it's all of it now, isn't it? We've only got limited, it's the only limited thing we have now is time. So how do we spend it that we can develop?
Well, I think what you've described there is something that we talk about a lot, which is the idea of a contract. So, for example, we do tons of work on getting different teams to collaborate better. You know, there is no team in the world that I've observed who will collaborate just because their boss asks them to.
Yeah.
It just doesn't happen unless those parties believe there's some kind of mutual reward to be had. You know, we are, I'm afraid, you know, driven, most of us, by, you know, what will it mean for me? So when we're trying to get global to work better with local, or if we're trying to get sales to work better with finance, you've got to try to create some sort of contract. You've got to try and create some mutual reward mechanic where I'm going to help you with X, but you're going to help me with Y. And that's often actually the mechanic for resetting relationships that might be a bit broken, which is just through asking the question, how can I help you?
So you obviously, did you always have a book in you, do you think? Is it something you dreamt, or was it just like one of those set of circumstances came around, it was like, this is a cracking idea?
No, it sort of helped happen by stealth, actually. So Will was writing for the Telegraph and there was no rugby. And so he pitched to the Telegraph the idea of doing 6 or 7 articles about learnings from sport that could have application for business.
Right.
And so we did one on feedback, and then we did one on purpose, and then we did one on generosity, and we picked sort of 6 or 7 topics, and they went down really well. And then we sort of got to the end of it and went, well, I think we've got 6 chapters to a book here. What might the next ones look like? So it made it kind of less. I think starting a book is quite hard.
If suddenly a blank piece of paper going, what we're going to do? Yeah.
So I feel like we got off to quite a positive start without really realizing it.
Yeah, I think it is, and it's great. And did it surprise you how well it went down, or how well it's still going down?
Yeah, I mean, you always. I wish it was in more hands. So I always thought that if you do well in your online sales, physical retail will follow, and that sort of hasn't happened. So we always thought it would be an amazing airport book. It'd be a really nice, you know, take you a couple of hours to read it. So we continue to do really well online. I just would love it to get into a few more shops and a few more hands. But really, actually, the thing that it helped me the most is early on, it forced me to kind of crystallize what's my belief system and what's the Growth House's belief system around some of these really big topics that, you know, 7 years on, our clients want to talk about. Help us be more disruptive and innovative. Help us feedback better. Help us build better connections with our partners and suppliers. These are all things we really crunched and sort of explored in the book. So it was a really good exercise to synthesize all the thinking, really.
That's brilliant. But like you say, it then gives you a natural with the Growth House to understand who should I get to speak, who's going to bring that alive, that particular area that goes down well, doesn't it? It gives you that network as well.
And that's for the work we do. The design process is almost always sitting with a senior leader and understanding where their team is kind of in its journey, what it's doing well, what it's doing less well, figuring out where we're going to focus our program, and then matching the right speakers to those tasks. So most of our programs, you know, unsurprisingly, you're delivering something that's 60 or 70% consistent. But I think the added value is that the 30 or so percent that you make really bespoke. Always used to really irritate me when I was buying services from consultants, when you just felt you were getting something off the shelf, and they hadn't really listened to the brief, and it didn't
Just
feel.
find and replace and change their company
Yeah,
name.
it just used to frustrate me. So we go to great lengths to try and make sure that the design process and the briefing is really tailored.
Brilliant. I love it. So are you allowed to claim, I suppose not your favourite, because that's not allowed, is it, in terms of people that you met? Who was the most surprising from maybe your preconception you had about a sports person or a business leader that you were like, oh my word, when you met them in real life and they opened up, that you were like, wow, that's different.
Well, so there are two people I'll talk about if it's okay,
Many
because
as
they.
you want, many as you want, Ben.
Well, there are two. There are two people. Actually, no. I'm going to talk about three. There are three people who we've used probably more than anyone else, and that's for a reason. And the first is Kate Richardson Walsh, who's the amazing GB, captained GB hockey for 13 years, was in the GB hockey team for 17 years, which is amazing to me.
Yeah.
That's a captaincy that the team vote for every year. So it's kind of incredible to be voted in 13 times. Um, and her narrative around being a great leader and being a great teammate is as good as anyone I've heard on that topic. And
Yeah.
that's why often when we kick off a process, we'll go back to Kate again and again and again, because she's so brilliant at teeing up the relationship between being a great teammate and being a great leader. Um, in terms of business leaders, Alan Joe has been a great friend of the business and a sort of a support to me. From He was the first person to read World Class and give me feedback. He was the first person to give me feedback on the creds. And he does a little bit of speaking every now and again for me, which is hugely appreciated. You know, when you've run Unilever globally, there aren't many issues you haven't run into, and he is a communicator of just such clarity, and is so economic with the way he communicates. And then finally, again, I'm staying on communication, but the single best voice and the single best delivery is Michael Johnson, and I've probably interviewed him 10 or 15 times, and you still just are blown away by that sort of Texan
It's just brilliant,
delivery.
isn't it? Yeah.
Oh, it's
Yeah.
amazing. And obviously he's total goat at, the events and the, you know, what he achieved as an athlete, but as a communicator, and a broadcaster, I think he's absolutely brilliant. So for communication reasons, those would be the three that we return to most often and who've just been a huge part in building the business.
That's amazing, isn't it? Yeah, there's something very interesting whenever you go back to Michael Johnson, when you are watching the Olympics or the World Championships or whatever, you feel like an expert by listening to him, don't you? Does that
Yeah.
make sense? You feel like, yeah, I know all about hurdles now. Yeah, exactly. Of course, you've got to do that many steps in between each one. But that's a great skill that you just naturally either have or don't. I don't think you can learn that, can you?
I don't think you can be as good as Michael or Alan or Kate if you don't have it in you. But I do think everyone can be a better communicator. I mean,
Okay.
I think the best communicators really work at it. And, we've worked with some brilliant people in that space. And, their view, I think of people like Richard Phillips, who's delivered some of the best training I've ever had, is the best communicators never stop working at it, never take it for granted, are always evolving, how they communicate. And that's the thing we talk about quite a lot, actually. We're often asked to help organizations with their individual and sort of cross-platform communication skills.
Yeah, perfect. Um, Tell me, before we move off the book, then, who would you recommend if you were doing a pitch? Who would you recommend read it? Because I'll tell you, there was a guy called Daniel Tem who runs Pure Sport, which is a supplement brand, that recommended it to me in a podcast interview. He said it's his go-to book that keeps him going. Now, he's a Kiwi, he loves his sports, and I think that's where he's come from. But yeah, if you're going to pitch it now, then who should be reading it? Who should be going out to W.H. Smith's, although it's not there anymore, T.J. Hughes or whatever it is now?
So the favorite type of feedback I ever get is, and Will and I get this reasonably often actually, is someone sends us a photo of their copy of the book with tons of post-its or highlighters all over it. And I love it when it's back to utility, when people are going, I've just started a new job, so I went back and I read the chapter on starts, on getting started.
Yeah.
Or I've got a team that's struggling with how they feedback and challenge, so I went and reread that. So my great hope is it's a book that you can go back to and sort of remind yourself on, irrespective of where you are in the organization. My hope is it's a thesis or a synthesis of what a load of high performance behaviors look like and how you can incorporate them irrespective of where you are in your career.
Brilliant. Right. We'll get selling it. We'll get some more out there. So in terms of, obviously, you set the Growth House up in, what was it, 2018, 2019, wasn't it, as you left BBH? How did it feel, sort of like you say, that first day when you come from this incredibly well-known, famous organisation that had culture running through it, that you're like, oh, wow, this is me now. What? Here we go.
Yeah, I found it really hard. Lots of people love that very first phase. Lots of entrepreneurs love the startup phase. I found that really difficult, and I'd been given some really good advice. So there was a client of mine who was a couple of years ahead of me on the journey, who said 3 bits of advice. First, you're going to miss the infrastructure and the support of 450 people and a whole IT department. That's gone. Secondly, you're used to being, in your industry anyway, a reasonably important person, so people return your calls and people don't blow out meetings and whatever. Well, that's gone. And then thirdly, there is no incoming. Half of my week as CEO was proactive and half of it was responsive, and there is no incoming.
There's nothing to sort yet.
If you don't make it happen, nothing will happen. And so I feel like I was prepared for those 3. The thing I wasn't prepared for, which I found really, really hard, was I didn't have a team to start with. It was me and a laptop sort of pounding the streets trying to get creds, opportunities and projects. And so that very start, and I'd never not been in a team, sports team, business team, whatever. And I found that intensely difficult. And so it probably wasn't until, I'm going to say, the end of year 1, start of year 2, where we'd got some case studies, we'd got the start of a team, we'd got some clients who made us feel like genuine partners, where I really thought, okay, this is starting to feel a bit more familiar now, and we can do it. And you try products that don't work, and you experiment with pricing, and you go to HR conferences and hang around in a booth and do all kinds of things that I'll never do again. And you learn and you iterate and you beta, and bit by bit you find what works. And I'll tell you, the thing that really irritated me was I should have been good, given my background, at synthesizing and kind of communicating what it is that the company did or does.
Yeah.
I just couldn't get to the words. I reckon it was 2 years before I got to high performance team behaviors. And in the 2 years preceding, I had all manner of word salads around what we were and what we weren't. And it would just get me more and more frustrated that I couldn't describe the business that I'd started. So anyone out there who is in that phase, I empathize with you. Just keep going, because when you do get to the words and the proposition and the way to talk about your business, you'll know.
I think that's, like you say, you spent all your life telling people what to do in that situation, haven't you? Your own stuff is so hard because it's personal, and you overanalyze it. You spend more time on it than anybody ever will. But I also think it's when you when you flick to make, and it's interesting your statement you just said about what it is now. When you flick to make it realize that it's not about you, it's about what you facilitate and what you give, and basically the solution that you have for these clients, that's when it starts to work and get exciting because they go, back to your book. It's practical. You're going to do that for me. Great.
Yeah, and I think a breakthrough moment for me was the identification of a problem. So the sort of the lean forward moment often with a client is when I'm able to say, look, I've met your exco, I've sat in a couple of meetings, I've watched, and yeah, you got 8 really impressive leaders, but they're hopeless teammates. Um, and what I feel I've seen again and again and again, particularly in the bigger organisations, once you've got to that very senior position in your organisation, you think more about the team than that you lead. You know, you think of that as your first team versus your boss's team and the kind of the exco group that you sit around with, and it's not surprising when you think about it because all your development is around leadership as your career goes on versus teamship, and yet all the dysfunction almost always is your peer-to-peer relationship. So I think that's been my sort of my biggest reflection in my second chapter. Really, is
Yeah. Your
is
second life. Yeah.
yeah, and it's just this thing that the dysfunction in companies is rarely vertical. It's rarely with you and your boss or you and your direct reports. It's almost always horizontal. It's peer to peer. It's supply chain. It's different divisions getting siloed and not operating well together. So building high performance in your team is job one, but building high performance kind of intra team is often job two.
Yeah. I suppose it comes back to that idea of the weakest link in the team, isn't it? If you can identify it and sort that, then I mean, I'll use your analogy of rugby. If you've got a crap scrum half, you're not winning, are you? And if you
Yeah.
can understand where that talent is to make sure the ball gets passed, it's the same in business, isn't it?
What, and to understand why it's in both parties' interests to
Yeah,
connect and collaborate, back to
yeah,
contracting and the idea of mutual reward. You know, just asking different divisions to collaborate won't work. You,
yeah,
you need to demonstrate why it will serve everyone's agenda if they do.
yeah. That's very true, isn't it? You paint that picture, then they can go, "I'll follow that. That's for me." So, do you think your lead, because obviously you developed a leadership style throughout different phases at BBH and then now, do you think you're a similar leader? You've just had to adapt to what you have around you.
I think your core beliefs, values, I would hope, kind of behaviors are consistent. I think
Yeah,
the leaders that I admire the most and the leadership traits that I've always tried to kind of role model, I would hope if you asked people who work with or for me at BBH, I would hope they have been pretty consistent and they're pretty consistent now. I think over time you just get more tools in your sort of tool bag, and
hmm,
you know that's very much our methodology. We're trying to arm people with as many tools for as many different situations as we can. And that's how our workshops work. That's what the last 7 years has been about, taking, you know, the best from sport, from the military, from all these cultures and making them simple, easy to use tools that people can deploy dependent on the situation.
yeah,
So I would hope, I would hope values, principles have been consistent, but I would hope I've got a much bigger kind of tool bag now.
yeah. And like you say, also with what you're preaching to people is what they have to do. You have to do to your own business too, don't you, to make sure you follow it through. Do you find obviously you've borrowed a lot, obviously with the book and everything, you borrowed a lot from sport. Do you find yourself looking at bigger rugby teams or football teams and sort of being able to identify, I see your problem, like your analogy a minute ago, or you're a bunch of individuals, you're not a team. Do you find yourself never switching off?
Yeah, definitely. When you work in advertising, you look at ads all the time. When you work in high performance behaviors, you look at teams. It's funny. Will keeps saying to me that we should get a sports client, we should get a team, or we should work with a team and help them get better, because there's lots of things that the best in sport do better than we do in business, but that should be two-way traffic. The best businesses, I'm sure, could definitely help some of the best
Yeah,
sports teams. We haven't done that yet, but that would be quite an interesting assignment, to work with an elite sport team, and hopefully help make them better. We have to be, a lot of the book is about sport. I'm actually a little bit wary, and this will make people laugh, because I got a lot of Mickey taking throughout BBH for using sports metaphors all the time. But you have to be a bit careful with sport and military. So a lot of our speakers at the Growth House are business people. They're 3-star chefs. We've got uh, movie directors and producers. So sport really works for some people,
yeah,
but it also leaves some people really cold. So I think there's a role for a fabulous speaker in sport, but one of the things I always want to do, and what we're always trying to do on the roster of speakers actually, is make sure it's really diversified, so that if sport isn't for you and you want to talk teamship through the lens of making movies or running a kitchen, then we can do that.
yeah, exactly. Maybe I'm just a biased audience here. Sorry, Ben.
No, listen, I'll talk sport all day. Don't worry about that.
I love it. I love it. And so, how's the future looking for Growth House now? Is it something that businesses, obviously, the economy is at a bit of a bumpy time at the moment in the UK. Are businesses still looking to build and grow?
So we're growing really nicely. You can't be called the Growth House and not grow. So
Yeah,
we've
Trade Descriptions Act. Yeah,
exactly, we put a bit of pressure on ourselves. Yeah, we've got a really nice geographic footprint. So I was in America last week. Got some nice business all over Europe and kind of in Asia. So there's nice geographical spread. A lot of our work is remote, which allows us to access clients internationally, but also speakers. So we're probably 60-40 remote versus face-to-face, which has been good for us. And then we've also launched, to scale a business like this, I run the leadership and the teamship programs, but I also have brilliant people who run our AI program, our diversity, inclusion, and belonging program, and our well-being and resilience program. So our horizons of growth are kind of geographic, as you'd expect, but also taking Growth House methodology into some other spaces, into those spaces. And again, those were the three that clients spoke to me about when we did our kind of client listening sessions. Those were the three areas that clients wanted help on.
that's brilliant. I suppose. And when you have it, go back to those days. Well, first got back to London. The idea of sitting down with a cuppa, having a chat, you learn more about what they want there and then, don't you, than you ever would if you gave them a formal questionnaire or a pitch.
100%. And if you can match, as always, your innovation funnel with client problems or client needs, you've got a much better chance of selling them. To be able to come back 6 months later and go, you told me you weren't happy with the speed of progress you were making on DIB, so we've found two brilliant partners and built this program. You've got a much better chance of selling it.
Love it. Yeah. Here's your idea played back to you.
Yeah, I worked with a brilliant planner called Jim Carroll, who said, I started my career in advertising thinking I was a doctor and my job was to prescribe the right solution to clients. And I think I ended my career believing I was a shrink, and what I had to do is find out the solution that clients wanted and then play it back to them. And I always thought
That
that
they
was,
couldn't articulate. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Very true. Very true. So look, run out of time, I'm afraid, Ben, but there's always one question we love to finish on, which is, and you could pick any inflection point, actually. You can either put when you first went in as a grad at BBH, you can pick starting at Asia, back to England, or starting Growth House. Is there a piece of advice that you've now, with all of this stuff you've done over the last few years, that you'd love to give a younger version of Ben? You can pick your version, because there's a few out there that might have helped that journey or might have saved a bit of pain.
So I mentioned Christine earlier, who was my managing director of the Singapore business, and she said to me as I was very early in my days out in Asia, she said, "You've come from a Western business culture, and the way you build relationships in the West is shared endeavor. You do stuff together and you build relationships through the doing." So what you need to understand is in Asia, if you don't build the relationship first, you don't get to do anything until you've built trust and you've built a relationship in its own right. There is no doing. And it was the most brilliant bit of advice. And so, for example, we did things like when we used to go to Thailand, we would do the meeting with Diageo and then we'd go and have dinner that night. And we said, well, we're doing this the wrong way around. Why don't we fly in the afternoon? Why don't you have dinner the night before and just really, you would end up talking about work, but you talk about an awful lot of other stuff as well. And then the meeting became much more of a kind of rubber stamp and formality for what you'd covered the night before.
Yeah.
And that's something I've definitely taken with me, that, in Avatar, the work will go through good phases and less good phases. If you've really prioritized the relationships that you build, you'll be able to weather that, because there will always be problems. There'll always be things that go wrong. If you've built a really strong relationship, individually, collectively, organizationally, you'll be okay.
That's amazing. That's brilliant. But like you say, the opposite of what we've always been taught, in our past. Right, Ben, we will leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. I've loved every second of that.
Absolute pleasure.
And good luck with your world domination.
Thanks, mate.